One thing you need to get right when you're ordering a floor is the measurements. It's expensive to transport any of these materials, so get it right the first time. And remember, you've got to add 10% to your measured area for waste. So how do you measure the room? You need a tape measure, pretty straightforward. Measure the length, multiply it by the width. This room is 3 metres by 2.4 metres. One thing you have to get right though, if you want to order something in square metres, you need to measure it in metres, not centimetres or millimetres. I'll show you what I mean. Here's our measurement for the width of the room. We said it was 2.4 metres. And as you can see, well, what you see is 240. The point is, that's 240 centimetres. 2.4 metres or 2,400 millimetres. We need to call it 2.4 metres so that when we multiply the width of the room by the length in metres, we end up with square metres. Now, when you're doing your measuring, obviously, you may be measuring a room that's a little more complicated than this very straightforward setup we've got here. So where you have bigger rooms or odd shapes and sizes, the trick is to break that room down into its component parts. So basically, squares or rectangles. Measure each square, each rectangle, multiply the length by the width, as we did here. The other thing that you might need to do is subtract some areas. So for example, this fire hearth, we need to subtract the area for that. And actually it brings us back to our previous point as well, because this hearth is 90 centimetres, 900 mil, or for our purposes, 0.9 of a metre. So it's 0.9 of a metre multiplied by 0.6 of a metre. That's 0.54 of a square metre. So you take that out of your measurements. To summarise then, for working out areas, measure in metres, because you want to order in square metres, multiply the length by the breadth of the room, or if you've got a complicated room, break it down into sections and work out the areas of each section, then add them together, remembering to take out any areas where you're not laying your floor, for example, the fire hearth that we looked at a minute ago, and add 10% to the total. Before you can start laying your floor, we need to do some setting out. Now, the first thing that involves is putting a centre line through the middle of the room. And the way we do that is to measure the width of the room at one end of the room and mark the middle point on the floor. We then go to the other end of the room and do the same thing. We measure the width and mark the centre point. We then strike a line between those 2 points. You'll see why in a minute. So Mario and I will do those measurements and mark the floor now. Okay. At this end of the room at least, the measurement is 2.4 metres, so half of that is 1.2 metres, and I'll mark that on the floor. Mario's doing the same thing. And we then use his chalk line and strike a line on the floor. If you've got a chalk line, it's very handy. You could use a long straight edge. So touch the chalk line on the 2 points, pull some tension onto it, ping it, and lift it up so you don't spread chalk all over the floor. That's our centre line. Now, the reason for measuring at 2 points in the room, here and here, is that although this little setup is almost certainly square, your room may not be. Your walls may drift a little each way. If you take centre point and strike a line, what you're doing is averaging the difference, and that will tend to be correct to the eye. Now, we can check our room for square now by measuring back from the chalk line to the wall. We already know that we had the same measurements, but if we did it again, I've got 1.2 metres. Mario's got 1.2 metres. So we know that this line is parallel to this wall. So we could start laying from this wall, and we know we're going to be right across the room. Okay, so we put our centre line with our chalk line down the middle of the room, and we are now set our board up over here so that the front edge of the board is an equal distance from the chalk line up there as it is up here. We have to now look at what we do if this wall is not parallel with this line. If that's the case, what you'll see is something like this, where we've got a big gap here and a tight gap down the front. Okay, so we want the front edge to be parallel with the line. What do we do at the back? It's unequal because this wall drifts out. So what we need to do is cut the back of this board so that leaving this in place, we create an equal gap down the back. And we can do that by scribing off the wall. All we need is something which is a little bit wider than the biggest gap, set it up against the wall, take a pencil and mark it all the way down. If you take that line right the way down the plank, what you can do is then pick the plank up, cut to your line, and that will give you an equal gap at the back. You can then move the plank backwards, but the front edge will be parallel to this line, which is the one you want to work off. Okay? That's the basic setting out. Let's assume then that you've got your first board in place and that the front edge here is parallel with your centre line in the room, and that you've cut the back of the board in if you needed to, if this wall ran out, and you're ready to get going. Now, the temptation at this point is to just put a full board down and to start laying. Now, the thing is, it's worth pausing at this point to work out what sort of a cut that's going to give you on the other side of the room, okay? The boards are a certain width, you're going to get a certain number of full board widths across the room, and at the other side, you don't want to arrive there and find that you've got a funny little rip this big. So do the measures now, and if you have a funny little cut at that end, the best thing to do is take something out the back of this board now, so that this shunts over and you create a bigger cut at the far side. Without giving you too much to think about, you've also got fire hearths and ins and outs in the room generally. You might want to take your time doing that checking and seeing if you want to adjust this board. We'll cover some of that more detailed work in another video as well.